Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for taking out a little bit of your time today to join us for this webinar around community education and an introduction to digital well-being and online safety for all parents and caregivers at your school district. I'm really excited to have you here with us. I'm going to start sharing my screen with you in just a second. For those of you who are watching perhaps a recording of this webinar, I just wanted to make a note here to say that we did offer this as a live webinar. We had a series of 3 introductory webinars for all the families at your district. And so we just want to give a couple of minutes to all of our attendees to sort of slowly start trickling in. As we're waiting for that, I can see that Rachel is here with us once again. So Rachel, I'm going to invite you to unmute and give us a few words of welcome again. Hi.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Excellent, excellent. Well, welcome again, and thank you again, Theodora, for your time tonight. We're excited to finish off this week, and the opportunities and information that you have provided us thus far have been fabulous. So I'm super excited to finish off this first one and then jump into what is yet to come. On behalf of the district, just welcome to everyone. And we hope that you're going to not only enjoy this evening, but those topics that we've selected going forward. I'll be putting information in the chat as it becomes available and as we discuss anything that's helpful. So don't miss those links that are put there. And I'll also drop my email address in there as the Chief Information Technology Officer in the district. I am also a resource for families, and don't hesitate to reach out. So with that, I hope everybody has made it in successfully, and we'll kick it all off.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much. So as I mentioned, this is the third of our sort of foundational or introductory webinars on the topic of digital well-being and online safety for your children. This might be the very first time that you're sort of watching a webinar or really experiencing any presentation around this topic. If you are, we're going to be sharing some of the basics around really what you can do in your role as your child's parent or caregiver, as sort of the trusted adult in their life, to really accompany them along this really crazy digital journey that they're on, and really make sure that the way in which they're interacting with and utilizing their technology is as safe and healthy as possible. So a little bit of background on me and why I happen to be here talking to you about this topic. My name is Teodora Pewaukee. I'm the Director of Wellbeing at an organization called LineWise. We've partnered with your district to do a couple of different things, one of which is to bring you all of these really great resources and all of this education, recommendations, and advice around what you as the parent or caregiver can do to help your child have a safer journey online. Of course, this is in addition to some of the other things that your school district is already doing to make sure that children stay safe online, stay safe on their school issue devices in particular. And this is where we go into the realm of sort of technology-based solutions such as the school filter, for example, which I'm sure many of you are aware of, and are aware of the fact that all libraries and schools in the United States are sort of obligated to provide these as a safety measure. My background is in psychology, so I have a master's degree in clinical psychology. I've worked a lot with parents as a parenting coach. I've also facilitated lots of workshops and talks with kids, starting from the age of about 2 or 3, talking to them about becoming a little bit more sort of mindful, emotionally aware of their thoughts, behaviors, and actions. And for almost the past decade, I've really been doing that with a particular focus on technology, and within the context of utilizing technology and asking a lot of questions around how we can help families as a whole, again, be safe and healthy in this modern age. So I'm very excited to be here with you, to be talking to you about some of these foundational steps that you can take. And then, as Rachel mentioned, we have created a program that's going to be stretching throughout this academic year. For all of you, these introductory webinars, we sort of separated out into elementary, middle, and high school webinars. But moving forward, you're going to be able to see the whole list of topics that we're going to be covering, things like cyberbullying, screen time, teenagers' use of AI, and you can feel free to sign up for any of the topics that are sort of particular interest to you. All of these webinars are delivered and are going to be delivered live, so we always encourage you to show up live, ask any questions that you might have, but we are going to be providing recordings of all of these as well, just so you have these as a kind of ongoing resource that you can tap back into. So in terms of our presentation today, what you can expect over the next sort of 30 or so minutes that we'll be spending together, I first want to tell you a little bit more about the Community Digital Wellness Program that we've partnered with your district to bring to all of the families at your school district. I'm going to be focusing in particular on one of the three pillars of that program, which is the Online Safety Hub. I'll take you into the hub, do a little demo, show you a kind of lay of the land, and make sure that you know how to utilize this resource and how to get your questions answered there. I then want to sort of go into the problems, some of the issues, some of the risks that we see children and teenagers running into online, because in order to of course be able to help them and to be able to talk about safety, we first have to understand what some of those risks and potential dangers are. So we're going to look at sort of the dark side first, if you will, and the problems, and then we're going to look at the bright side. We're going to look at the solutions. We're going to look at some of the proactive things that you can do in order to help your children stay safe online. So this is where I'm going to go into what we refer to as the ABCs, or the ABC approach to online safety management. We'll be talking about access, boundaries, and communication. And I'm going to be sharing some recommendations and some actionable steps there, ideas for conversation starters, and really things that you can start implementing and that you can start doing as soon as you're done watching this webinar. So I hope you'll find all of that information really useful. Again, as Rachel mentioned, you can feel free to reach out to her with any questions. I'll be sharing my email with you at the very end of this presentation as well. And then you'll also see that inside the Online Safety Hub, we have a couple of sort of interactive spots inside the hub where you can also reach out to us and let us know if you need any additional resources. So when it comes to the community program, as I mentioned, it consists of three pillars. The first one is the Online Safety Hub. I'll be taking you inside your district's hub in just a second. This is essentially a website, a library of resources, if you will, with lots of really great information, a lot of educational materials in there. We have a lot of templates in there, guides talking about current trends, all of that really meant to help raise your levels of awareness to begin with, but really always ultimately with that goal of upskilling you and helping you become a more confident parent of your digital native. The second pillar there, which we won't really be going into during this particular presentation, is the Custodial Parent app. This is a parental control tool that provides you with some insights into your child's activity online, and then giving you some functionality there to essentially apply those ABCs of online safety management in order to have a little bit more sort of control, a little bit more supervision over what your child is doing on their device and in the various virtual spaces where they spend their time. And then third and final, what we're engaging with right now is this live educational component, these live parent webinars, which really give me the opportunity to speak to some of those key online safety trends, some of the key issues that we hear our partner districts telling us about, offer you some of those practical insights, some recommendations for steps that you can take, and then of course provide you with that opportunity to ask any questions. This is why we always conduct these webinars live, but as I mentioned, provide recordings afterwards to make sure that this is really an ongoing resource for you. And the one final thing I'll just say here is that I'm, of course, based in the United States. I'm the lead online safety and digital well-being expert for our US region for LineWise, but we are a global organization. And so we have, or I have counterparts in places like the United Kingdom and Australia and New Zealand as well. And so we really have that kind of global perspective when it comes to online safety, and we really bring that expertise from around the world to these resources that we're providing you with. And so let's move on to that first pillar. You're going to hear me saying these three words a lot: Online Safety Hub. It's one of the resources that I'm most excited about. If you're not familiar with the hub and you haven't been in there just yet, you can go ahead and scan this QR code. It will take you straight there. And as you're doing that, I'm just going to stop sharing my deck for a second so that I can hop on over to your district's hub and just show you around a little bit. All right. Okay, you should be able to see the landing page. You can see your little logo there. And then you can see that on this landing page, to begin with, we have a number of sort of different categories of the content that we have inside the hub, really there to help guide you once you land on this page, whether you know exactly the type of information you're looking for, or whether you're really just starting out with this topic of online safety and digital well-being and aren't really quite sure even what you're looking for. So you can see here that we have some of our most recent pieces here. You can see that we have a whole list of app and game reviews. This is just sort of the top 4 that are listed there. If you have a look at this sort of navigation menu here, if you look at these little tabs here, you'll see here that if you click on this reviews section here, you're going to see many, many more apps and platforms that we have gone in and done a review on and shared with you here. At the moment, we have something over 300, about 312 to be more precise. I think apps and games that we reviewed, you can see some of the more familiar ones. I'm sure the little, TikTok, YouTube, Snapchat, Instagram logos will be really familiar to you, but there's a whole host of other ones as well. You can utilize these little filters that we have along the left-hand side of every page in case you want to find something more specific. But then you can also feel free to use this search bar here in the top right corner as well, just to make it a little bit faster to get to the information that you're looking for. I'll click on the TikTok review just to give you a sense of the type of information that we include in all of these app and game reviews. One of the things that you'll see straight away is an age recommendation based on what our experts recommend. So this is where we'll take in sort of a few different pieces of information into consideration when we determine what we would recommend as a kind of age limit. For the most part, some of you might be familiar with this already. 13 tends to be the age at which most social media platforms are sort of acceptable for children and teens to start using. Similar ages that you'll see across gaming platforms as well. We know that this is one of the areas that parents tend to require the most support with. There was research a couple of years ago that showed that something like 60% of parents didn't actually realize that gaming platforms have age recommendations and age restrictions. And you'll hear me referencing this again a little bit later on. It's a really, really important part of really determining which virtual spaces are safe for our kids and which of those spaces our children are really prepared to handle based on the skills that they have developed. Again, it's really important to also note that you will know your child best. Not every 15-year-old is exactly the same as every other 15-year-old. So we do always recommend that you take these with a grain of salt and that you always keep in mind sort of your own child's specific, personality, traits, characteristics, skills, their own sort of ability and knowledge to keep themselves online. It's a really important part of all of this. But with each one of our reviews, you'll see a little description there of the particular platform. We highlight some of the features and the key risks that are a part of that platform, of that environment. And then we have a list of some topics that we feel parents really need to know, some tips and tricks for safe and responsible use there, and some of those practical reviews. We always want to make sure that in addition to sort of uncovering the problems, we also uncover the solutions and the practical steps that you can take. And so that's where you'll be able to find those. For any platform that has built-in parental control tools, we'll always list those there. We'll explain to you in sort of very simple terms how to go ahead and activate those when they're privacy settings that can also be played around with a little bit and maximized, that's where we'll go into those as well. And as I mentioned earlier, there is that sort of interactive component of the hub where we really want to hear from you as well. If there is a particular question, a particular topic or trend that we haven't written about and that you would really like to know more about, you can click on this request a new article or app review button and let us know. If there is a particular platform, gaming, social media, what have you, that we haven't reviewed yet, we always really want to know more about that. We want to know about the types of platforms that children are using and spending a lot of time with. So please, again, let us know here. We really, really encourage you to do that and to let us know really any kind of information in addition to what you find here that we can help you with. So if we go back to the landing page, just a couple of other things that I'll highlight. You can take some time and look through these different sections here, have a look at the different types of content that we have here. We have this little drop-down menu here under more, where you'll be able to find some other topics in addition to what you'll find here. If you scroll down, you'll see that we have a couple of other sections there. We have the most popular section. We have this explore section, depending on what you're sort of coming to the hub wanting to do, and what are the types of questions and type of information that you'd really like to get out of it. We have some information here about the Custodial Parent app as well. And then because of course we know that nowadays people prefer to not at all or not only consume sort of text-based formats, we have created some short videos for you there on some interesting topics around online safety and digital well-being, and you will see a familiar face in there. Actually, you'll see me featured in a couple of these different videos as well. Again, here you can see a little bit more of each one of those sections, addressing things like privacy, bullying, gaming as well. And then again, that little button at the very bottom of that landing page where you can request a new article or an app review. We have a little about section here as well in case you'd like to learn a little bit more about my background or the rest of our in-house expert team. All right, so with that, I'm going to jump back in to our presentation. If you just bear with for a second. There we go. All right. Okay, so as I mentioned towards the beginning, it's important to sort of have a sense of what some of the issues are, some of the problems before we go into fixing them first. And if Zoom would cooperate here with me, that would be really wonderful so that you can actually see my screen. But it looks like it's a little bit of a reluctant participant. Let's try one more time. All right. I think you should be okay now to see the key online safety risks. So let's have a look at what these are. We go back into this list every, I would say about 6 to 12 months to really review it, to sort of take into consideration what the current trends are, what are some of the experiences that we're hearing about that children are encountering online. And this can be very, very young children, starting from about the age of 6 or 7 or 8, going all the way up to those high schoolers and to those older teenagers. There's a very interesting thing that sort of happens here in the context of how old your child is. So we've, as I mentioned, delivered these webinars to the elementary school families, middle school families too, and now we're addressing those of you who have kids in high school. One of the sort of the fears or one of the things that make parents of younger children really nervous when they look at this list is, there's some really, really serious topics here, things like sexting, things like grooming. These are things that I don't really think my young child is aware of yet. They probably don't know about this yet, and I don't want to be the one to sort of put this in their mind. So I feel very nervous then about starting to talk to them about these topics. And what I often say to that is there are ways of introducing these topics without actually talking about these topics if we're really not comfortable doing that yet with, say, our 8-year-old. As children sort of start getting older and as we start looking at the high schoolers, there's, I would say, next to no chance that if you have a high schooler, they aren't aware of all of these safety risks for one reason or another. It doesn't have to mean that they've experienced them directly themselves, but they will have some sense of what the risk of misinformation is all about. They'll have some sense of what scams are. Pornography and sexting and nudes, they will definitely be aware of it. There's research out there in the US showing that something like even 50% of middle schoolers have in some way engaged in sexting, or at least attempting to send a nude, or have received a nude as well, right? So by the time your child is a high schooler, that fear can sort of come off the table. You can be certain that if you start initiating some conversations around toxic behavior online, for example, they will definitely know what you're talking about. So that makes the issue somewhat easier. When we talk about that C in the ABC approach, is where we're talking about communication. That's the reason that communication with high school children or teenagers can be a lot easier, because they do have that sense of familiarity with all of these issues, and in some cases, we will find that they do take a really proactive step towards trying to address these issues, both for themselves and for their peers. One other thing I'll say is that a few of these risks um, are pretty clearly um, you know what's the best word, negative or problematic. Things like grooming. There are no two ways about it, right? Pornographic content for our kids as well. These are really serious issues, and we need to deal with them in pretty much a uniform way. Some of these other risks, there's a little bit more nuance around them, and so, for example, gaming is one that we talk about a lot with all the different age ranges. Certainly, once we get to high school, we do tend to see relatively heavy sort of involvement with gaming for those kids who are gamers. And there's some recent research that shows that as many as about a quarter of boys in the US and about a fifth of girls are spending about 3+ hours every day gaming in gaming environments. This is usually on consoles or on their laptops, right? When we say something like that, that often sounds quite dramatic. It sounds like quite a big problem, but gaming is not as clear cut of a risk as, say, grooming, where with grooming, we definitely know that it's a bad thing. Something bad will happen. When it comes to some of these other risks, we really need to approach them with a little bit more nuance and just ask some questions around why this particular online behavior is actually happening. So when it comes to gaming, for example, some children might really, really be genuinely struggling in school, and they sort of use gaming as either a kind of escape sort of route, an escape mechanism, or they're using gaming environments which might have some educational components there because they find it much easier to learn and or interact in a gaming environment, right? Sometimes we find that with children who have special learning needs, who are perhaps on the autism spectrum as well. In some instances, we might see that children who have some mental health issues, perhaps who are dealing with a lot of anxiety, really find it much easier to, again, sort of channel that anxiety in some of these virtual, gaming environments. Some children might use gaming as an escape because, for example, they're being bullied in a lot of other virtual spaces or offline spaces as well. And then other times, kids just might enjoy these games. Perhaps they provide them with an opportunity to be really social, to interact with other kids, to do really fun things, to be entertained, to learn new skills, to even learn how to problem solve, critical thinking skills. A lot of other really positive things can come out of gaming. So that's just one thing that I like to mention, especially when I'm talking to parents of older children, older teenagers. As kids are older, their psyche and some of the issues and struggles they encounter will also become more complex. And so we see that their sort of behavior in virtual spaces, the way they use technology also becomes increasingly complex and complicated. So whereas the view here might be much simpler for someone who has an elementary school child, once your child gets to that high school level, we really want to start asking some of those more nuanced questions and look at both the positives and negatives behind the different types of online behaviors that they might be engaging with. So now that we've sort of identified some of those key risks, let's start talking about what we can actually do about them and what is a kind of a foundational approach to managing online safety with your children at home. So we're talking here about sort of conceptualizing their access to technology, so kind of how we address that. We're then talking about how we can build some of those healthy boundaries around their technology use. And then finally, again, I mentioned communication, conversations, we're talking about how we're talking about technology with our kids. And of course, this will vary depending on, again, how old our child is, how we manage, again, their access, the types of boundaries that we build will look very different with our 8-year-old as compared to, to say our 18-year-old. But the one thing that's really important is, regardless of the child's age, to really keep in mind what those boundaries are that we want to build around their use of technology in that age appropriate way, and to then also be very clear and consistent with that. And there's a little bit of information around children's brain development as they get into those sort of tween and teen years that I always like to share this when I speak to parents of middle and high schoolers. What we find is that kids between sort of those 12 to 15 years are at a greater risk for encountering some of those online safety risks that I mentioned earlier. And so, of course, researchers around the world, parents, pediatricians, teachers are asking the question, why? Why do we see that with that particular age group? We know that one reason is definitely increased device access. In the US, the average age is around 10 or 11 when a child first gets their own smartphone, right? So moves from just sort of perhaps borrowing a device or just using a tablet to actually experiencing ownership of their own smartphone or a supercomputer, as some people like to refer to it. But at the same time, we're also noticing certain things about their brain development that are also actually influencing this increase in experiencing some of these online safety risks. So what you'll be more than familiar with already, if you have a middle or a high schooler, is that there is this increased sort of sense of independence, this increased desire and almost demand, really, for autonomy, for being able to sort of make their own decisions independently, do the things that they want to do them in the ways in which they want to do them, without having to involve their parents or other adults in their lives too much. At the same time, though, what's happening in terms of their brain development is that there is a kind of underdevelopment, if you will. There's an uneven development in that desire as compared to their ability to make those decisions in a rational kind of a way. So impulse control isn't really yet at the level at which we would want it to be, so that it could pair up nicely with that desire to be independent. So that desire for independence sort of races across much, much faster than the ability for their brain to really develop that capacity for self-regulation, critical thinking, and some of those other skills that are incredibly important, and that they're going to spend about another decade or so developing. So the outcome then is this increase in risky behavior, whether it's online or offline, at the same time as we're seeing this very, very heavily emotional decision making. Emotions, by the way, always play some kind of a role in the decisions that we make, whether we're 10, 30, 60, or 100. So emotions always play a key role, but it's really that self-regulation piece. It's that ability to switch on our thinking brain as well as our feeling brain when we're trying to make decisions about, for example, whether the right thing to do in this moment is to send a nude photo to somebody who we don't exactly know, right? Those are some of those sort of critical situations where our children, when they get to this sort of age range, may not make the best decision in that moment. All of this is to say that it's, again, really important to keep those boundaries clear and consistent at this point. I emphasize this because we do often find that parents who have kids at around this age range tend to sort of pull back a little bit for different reasons. The boundaries become a little bit loose. The enforcement of some of these boundaries and some of the consequences for breaking these boundaries, that tends to sort of slip away a little bit more. So this is just kind of a reminder and really an encouragement from me to you to keep those boundaries consistent, even during that period of time. And I would say even more so than when your children are a lot younger, certainly more so than, once they're older and they've left home and gone to college or, are sort of joining the workforce. So when we're talking about that age, talking about access, what are we talking about exactly? So two questions there that we're wanting to answer. For one, we're thinking from the perspective of what our child has access to both the actual device that they have access to, but what's on that device as well. And the when question is important there as well, right? So time is always relevant. When you have an older child, time on its own is really not enough. It doesn't paint a whole picture. As I mentioned earlier with that gaming example, 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 hours gaming will sound like a lot for sure. But we need to dig a little bit deeper when we're talking about a slightly older child and really understand why this behavior is even happening. We need a little bit more information before we can launch into the conversation around you're spending way too much time doing this or you're not spending enough time doing something else, right? Whatever it happens to be. So we do definitely encourage, even with high schoolers, that you use parental control tools. We do encourage that you use them in a different way, of course, than when your child is younger. It needs to be a much more sort of collaborative approach. And you might want to change sort of the amount of insight that you have into their online behavior. Where, for example, with an elementary school child, you might want to have full visibility over absolutely everything that they're doing. As your child gets into that sort of middle school age, you can pull back a little bit on that visibility. You never want to pull back on the C bit, though, conversations, which we're going to be talking about in just a little bit. And then once your child gets to that high school age, and you're wanting them to have that amount of skill and self-regulation and self-control and critical thinking where they can make some of those decisions themselves, you don't need to have as much visibility necessarily as you did before, because it really is that balancing act of making sure that they're empowered and upskilled to handle some of these issues on their own, and that we're just really there to provide that support, and that we're really there to help guide some of their decision making, be there for those worst case scenario situations and so on, right? Very much what we do sort of in the offline world as well. The most important thing to remember is that it really does need to be a collaborative effort as your child gets older. We definitely recommend using the Online Safety Hub there as a guide for age recommendations. If you have an older high schooler, there aren't really any issues with them accessing the various types of platforms that are available to them. As I mentioned, 13 really tends to be sort of the most common age across these different platforms. But you still want to be mindful of the types of interactions that are happening in these virtual spaces. What are the sort of trends that are really big on, say, TikTok versus Snapchat? Does your child have a problem sort of saying no to one app or platform more so than the other? Is one sucking up more of their time than others, and so on? Not all social media platforms are built the same, or gaming platforms too. So it's still good to, at that point, not so much perhaps focus on the age restrictions, but really to look at some of those other features that you'll be able to read about inside the Online Safety Hub, some of those privacy settings and things like that that you can help your child put into place. And then also things like, if something does go wrong, if there is a bad incident of cyberbullying, or your child encountering misinformation, disinformation, anything like that, or violence, that both you and they know where to go on that particular platform to report that incident. And then finally, knowing how to turn on some of those built-in internet filters that exist on pretty much all the devices that we use nowadays, all the operational systems that these devices utilize. When you're using Google, for example, there's such thing as a Google Safe Search, YouTube restricted mode as well. And again, this is something to consider more so if your child is sort of a younger teenager, not so much once they sort of become a junior and a senior in high school. When we're talking about boundaries, we are, on the one hand, talking about those boundaries around their access to the actual physical device and to the different platforms inside their device, but we're really talking about much more than that. So we are talking about time spent, but we're really also talking about expected behaviors online. And that portion is particularly relevant and becomes increasingly relevant the older that your child is. So that's really something to focus on with, say, a 16 or a 17-year-old. I always like to say it's not that dissimilar to what we do sort of in the offline world. We talk to our children all the time about how do we behave when we're in the privacy of our own home versus how do we act when we're somewhere outside, say when we're at a restaurant or we're in another public place. How do we speak to people we know we're familiar with as opposed to people who we don't know? How do we speak to people who are older than us? What types of information do we share, right? All those things we talk about in the context of the offline world. We're really just sort of replicating those conversations for these virtual spaces. And one of the sort of the best tools that you can use to make these conversations a lot easier, to make it easier to create these clearer boundaries, is to use something known as the digital contract. Sometimes they're called family contracts or tech agreements, to establish some of those clear rules. And what I also always like to tell parents is, as your child grows and develops, that contract can grow and develop together with your child, so that the contract that you create when they're 8 is not going to have to stay the same as they get to the age of 10 and 12 and 13 and 14, right? So it's important for us to stay flexible here as well, to revisit these rules, these boundaries that we create every 3 months or 6 months or a year, however often we feel that it's most appropriate. And again, especially when you have an older child, to really think of this as a collaborative process, to really talk to them about the kind of boundaries that you would like to place, and then get some feedback from them in terms of that. One sort of extra bonus tip that can make this process really fun and not annoying to your child, especially if they're a high schooler, is to ask them to do the same thing for you. So if there were, I don't know, two boundaries that they really, really feel that you should be implementing and respecting and sort of enforcing for yourself, ask them what those would be. They love that. They often find that we're quite hypocritical when we start venturing into conversations around screen time and device use. So if we ask them to place some boundaries on us, it can make this conversation a lot easier. Another really important thing to do, and this especially applies to nighttime, to bedtime, to bedrooms, is to set up really clear off times. So this is the point at which we stop, consuming digital content, using technology, and to really limit that device use in bedrooms as much as possible. It can be very hard to do with high schoolers, especially if you've never really done it before, you've never had this conversation, but you can always use a webinar like this as a conversation starter, and say, I watched this webinar about some of these, healthy boundaries that we can place around our tech use. How can we create more balance in how we use technology? How can we make sure that we get enough sleep and rest at night so that we're more prepared for our day? One thing that they mentioned was really to do with bedrooms and sort of the role that our device plays in terms of disrupting our sleep. Let's talk about that, and kind of let's see how we can create that healthier balance. And really, ultimately, the best tip that I can share with you is, as you're thinking about those behaviors that you'd like to see from your kids, to really think about modeling those behaviors to them first. So if it's something like bedrooms, and that's one that you feel really strongly about, that you do you take that first step and you remove your device from your bedroom. Or if it's device-free meals, that you, in front of everybody at a dining table, take out your phone or tablet or whatever the piece of tech is, you switch off the notifications, put it away in like a common area in the home, whatever it happens to be. It's a much more effective way of trying to get our kids on board, and trying to really get them to replicate the kind of behavior that we want to see from them as well. When it comes to tech contracts, you will find a number of templates inside the Online Safety Hub. You can select them based on your child's age. But what I also want to recommend that you do is check out the tech contract that Rachel has created. There's one for the elementary school kids, one for middle school kids, one for high schoolers as well. I'm sure Rachel has already shared the link in our chat for all of you who are joining us live. This is a really just a fantastic version that I've seen of these tech contracts, just outlining some of those, again, boundaries and expectations that we were talking about before. And again, what I would really encourage all of you to do, if you do want to share this with your kids, especially, again, those older high school kids, is to really think of this as a kind of collaborative effort. Have them read through this, see what they think, see if there are things they would like to add, things that they would like to take away. And again, trying to involve them as much as possible in terms of perhaps outlining maybe just one or two boundaries for you and the other adults at home. That always helps the process run more smoothly. And then finally, the C in the ABC approach: communication, conversations, really making online safety, digital well-being, healthy screen time balance, healthy tech use balance a frequent conversation point, a frequent talking point in your home. We do find, based on anecdotal data, based on research, that the kids who do tend to report the most positive and least negative experiences online do live in homes and in families where this is a frequent conversation point. This really helps them know that you are engaged, that you're sort of aware of what's going on. This also signals to them that you're sort of involved enough and in the know enough to act as a resource for them, so that if they are running into trouble of some kind, their first thought isn't, "Oh, what are they going to know about it? What are mom or dad or grandma or whoever, what are they going to do? They don't know anything about this. There's no way that they can relate to this. They won't know how to help me report this, or they won't be able to help me intervene, or whatever else it is," right? So when you are involved, when you are communicating on a regular basis, you're also signaling to them that you are learning about this as well, that you're open to learning, and that if that worst case scenario does happen, if they do end up interacting with a really inappropriate adult, or they come across really inappropriate, disturbing, troubling content, or they come across threats of violence, for example, that they feel like they need to do something about, but they don't quite know what to do about it, they'll know that you will likely know. And that you can really serve as that resource for them in those moments. We frequently find that children underreport negative online experiences because they don't think that we really know enough to help them, right? They don't think we can even tell the difference between, say, Snapchat and TikTok, let alone anything else, right? So it can go a really, really long way. You learning about these things more, sort of educating yourself, using things like the Online Safety Hub to learn more about these platforms, about children's online behavior, and then initiating some of those conversations with them about both the benefits and the risks of these virtual spaces, so that you're really building up that rapport, and you're really building up your child's confidence in you as well. And so some of the communication strategies that we recommend are things like problem solving. So, if a cyberbullying incident, for example, happens, really showing up as a resource to your child, letting them know that you will help them problem solve, not necessarily solve the whole issue for them, that you can report incidents if that's what's needed, that you can help them take a break from social media if they want that, if it needs to be reported to the school, the district, law enforcement, right? Whatever level sort of escalation is needed, but that you're really there to be that resource. Leaving space for them, especially during those more difficult conversations or more awkward conversations. If you have teenagers, they probably are not the chattiest of people. They all go through those phases. So making sure that, if you are asking them some open-ended questions, they need a little bit of time to answer, that you really give them that space to share about their own experiences. And then finally, trying to talk with them as much as we possibly can. Again, a particularly relevant piece of advice, I think, once our kids get to that older age, certainly once they're 17, 18, and then especially 19 and 20, trying to take a little bit more of that sort of peer-to-peer position, especially when it comes to some of these issues around the online world, because of course they were born into it and they're familiar with it in a way in which we're not. So we're definitely there to serve as that more sort of wise guide, if you will, and help them navigate some of these sticky and tricky situations. But in terms of having that very implicit kind of knowledge of what this online world is like, they have a knowledge there that we simply can't replicate it, right? We're not used to this digital world in the way that they are. So that type of approach to having these conversations can go a really long way as well. All right, wonderful. I think we're going to stop there. We did go a little bit over time, and I talked to you for a little bit longer than I wanted to. I could talk for many, many more hours. We are going to stop right now when it comes to this particular webinar. I'll just repeat again that we do have a whole series of webinars that we've planned out for you. We're going to be talking about just about all of the topics really that we started on here. And we're really excited about that. Again, whichever one of those that you're interested in, I really encourage you to sign up for those. If you have any questions, your own personal experiences with those topics, I would really encourage you to bring those to us. And then if you have any follow-up questions around anything, to please feel free to reach out to either Rachel or myself. And with that, Rachel, I think I'll invite you to just unmute one more time before we wrap up.
Great. Well, thank you. I really enjoyed tonight, and it has been awesome to hear the different levels and all of the different information that you've brought around the same topic, but at different age levels. So I would encourage any parents who have children at those different age levels. Once we're able to get these recordings out, they are worth a listen. There is a lot of information throughout them, and tonight was very much the same. So, thank you to everyone who joined us, and to those who will watch later. And I hope that we'll see people again in our next series. Again, those links are all there, but we'll be pushing those out through social media and, of course, um, newsletters and that sort of thing as they get closer.
Fantastic. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Rachel. Really looking forward to seeing you again. Really looking forward to hosting more of these webinars. And again, if you have any questions about any of the topics that we've covered, if you'd like any additional resources, please reach out to us and let us know. And you all have a great rest of your day. Bye.